All right, today we are unpacking a huge controversy that's been swirling around the Philippine Senate. We're talking about a story that's got everything: serious allegations, flat-out denials, a really complex paper trail, and, well, hundreds of millions of pesos that some are calling phantom funds. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with the first number that really set off all the alarm bells. 355 million pesos.
But, it didn't stop there. An even bigger number popped up: 600 million. So, what in the world are these staggering amounts of money for?
Well, according to a whistleblower, these huge sums were allegedly inserted right into the national budget. And what were they supposedly for? Flood control projects. These claims have, as you can imagine, kicked off a massive, high-profile investigation into corruption.
So let's start with part one: millions in alleged insertions. The whole story really boils down to some pretty explosive accusations against two sitting senators, and it all started with one former government engineer.
All right, let's get to know the key players here. First up, you've got Senators Jingoy Estrada and Joel Villanueva. They're the ones at the center of these allegations. The person making the claims? That's Brice Hernandez, a former public works engineer who's now the whistleblower. And the guy in charge of digging into all of this is Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson, the chairman of the Senate's very powerful Blue Ribbon Committee.
Okay, Section 2, decoding unprogrammed funds. Now, to really get what's going on here, we have to dive into the kind of complicated world of the national budget. We've got to figure out where this money was supposedly hidden, because believe me, it was not sitting out in plain sight.
Right, that's the million-dollar question, or in this case, the hundreds of millions of pesos question. If this money wasn't listed in the main budget where everyone could see it, then where in the world was it?
And the answer is something called unprogrammed funds. Okay, so what are those? Think of them like a government's just-in-case money, or standby funds. They're not part of the main budget, and they can only be touched if the government happens to bring in extra revenue. And because of that, well, they're a lot harder to keep track of. And this is a really big deal. During one of the hearings, Senator Ime Marcos basically said that this is the perfect place to hide ghost projects. Projects that look real on paper but don't actually exist. Her point was pretty clear. If you want to find potential corruption, this unprogrammed list is probably the first place you should be looking. And we're not talking about some tiny, forgotten corner of the budget here. Just look at how this thing has exploded. It went from 176 billion pesos in 2021 to an absolutely staggering 807 billion in 2023. That kind of massive jump in harder-to-track money, yeah, that's what's raising a ton of red flags for a lot of people.
Which brings us to part 3, the committee's paper trail. So how exactly did this all start to unravel? Well, Senator Lacson's committee started digging through the budget books, and they were determined to follow the money. And what they found was pretty interesting. The allegations against the two senators are actually a little different. The 355 million pesos tied to Senator Estrada, that was supposedly found in the regular budget for 2025. But the 600 million linked to Senator Villanueva, that was traced back to those much trickier unprogrammed funds from a previous year, 2023.
And Senator Lacson, the lead investigator, he made his thoughts on this very, very clear over on social media. He basically said, look, he hasn't cleared the two senators. And his reason? He says the budget books themselves actually seem to back up what the whistleblower's claiming. That's a pretty strong statement.
Okay, on to Section 4, the senator's defense. So you've got this paper trail starting to emerge. How did the senators respond? Let's get into their side of the story from those pretty tense hearings.
So both senators have denied everything, firmly and consistently. Senator Estrada called the claims straight-up lies and said they were just attacks on his reputation. Senator Villanueva took a different approach. He really zeroed in on the digital evidence, saying that screenshots of text messages are super easy to fabricate. It is interesting, though, that both of them said they were willing to sign bank waivers to let investigators look at their accounts.
And things got really heated in the hearing during this one exchange. Senator Estrada went right at his accuser, Brice Hernandez. See, Hernandez claimed that his contact person was a staffer of the senator named Bang Ramos. Estrada's response was, well, it was forceful. He said, "I've never had a staff named Bang Ramos."
So how did Hernandez reply? He said that another contractor, a guy he called Boss Henry Alcantara, was the one who told him Ramos worked for the senator. This is where it gets messy, right? It's a classic he said, she said situation, because Alcantara later came out and denied he ever said that.
which just makes the whole thing even more complicated.
And this brings us to our final section, pork barrel's new disguise. You know, this whole thing really brings up a much bigger question that goes way beyond just these allegations. Is what we're seeing just a new, modern version of a very, very old problem in Philippine politics?
I mean, especially for Senator Estrada, this must feel a lot like déjà vu. This is not the first time he's been at the center of a major corruption scandal.
And that's some really crucial context to remember here. He was actually convicted of plunder for his part in the massive PDAF scandal, better known as the pork barrel scandal. It was literally the biggest corruption case of its generation.
And this whole situation really seems to highlight how these things may have evolved. The old pork barrel system, the PDAF, was pretty straightforward. Lump sum funds were given to lawmakers, which left a pretty clear paper trail. This alleged new method, though, it's a lot more sophisticated. You insert specific projects right into the budget itself, often hiding them in those unprogrammed funds we talked about. And the result of that? Well, it creates plausible deniability, and it makes it so much harder for the public to figure out what's really going on.
So what's the big takeaway here? This scandal is about so much more than just 2 senators or a couple hundred million pesos. It really shines a light on a system where accountability can just disappear into confusing budget language and complicated rules. And that leaves us all with one final and I think really important question to think about. When everything is hidden in the fine print like this, who's the one that's really paying the price?